Hello everyone and happy Thanksgiving weekend. At the time that I'm recording this, it's the day before Turkey Day, and I'm seriously looking forward to not having to go to work tomorrow. So for today's video, I wanted to focus on the 3-star unit that was added into FEH just last week. Chad! Yes, there is a character in Fire Emblem whose name is Chad. Seems too good to be true, doesn't it? As I'm sure you're all aware by now, Chad was added directly into the 3-star summoning pool during the release of the Guardians of Peace banner that featured some of your favorite heroes from Binding Blade. In last week's video, we crafted some builds for Echidna, who many of us expect to be the banner demote. But for this week's video, I wanted to shine some light on the new 3-star unit, as I'm sure some of you might be interested in merging him up. So to get us started, we've got Chad's base kit in front of us. At 5 stars, level 40, his neutral stats read as HP 45, attack 30, speed 37, defense 26, and resistance 23. It's worth noting that Chad has a super boon in defense, which we will definitely make use of in one of our builds today. So right off the bat, I have to be honest with you guys and point out that his stats are not stellar. They're definitely workable though, and for those of you that really love Chad and maybe even plan to pair him alongside Ray or Lou, I can assure you that his stats are salvageable and that we can definitely find some way to slot him into your team. With a base speed of 37, Homeboy's got some solid speed, which we will also take advantage of in another one of our builds. But before that, let's quickly talk about his base kit. In his weapon slot, Chad comes with the Rogue Dagger Plus. I think it's fairly fitting for his character, and also worth mentioning that the only other character who has this weapon is Matthew. However, unlike Matthew, Chad doesn't have access to its weapon Refine, the Spy's Dagger, which is a shame because it's a really good Refine, but that's alright. The Rogue Dagger Plus in its base form has a debuffing effect similar to that of all daggers. After combat, it inflicts -5 to the enemy's defense and resistance. Please note that this debuff is only applied to the target. However, in return, it grants Chad a boost of +5 to his defense and resistance. Definitely a give and take situation. It's a neat little dagger, but without access to its weapon Refine, it'll have limited use in any of our builds today. For his assist skill, Chad comes with Drawback, which basically allows both him and an ally to retreat 1 tile. It definitely has some uses in Ether Raids and Arena, but unsurprisingly, we'll be switching it out. Alright, jumping over both his special and A slot, we've got Escape Route 3. Escape Route is another really interesting skill that allows Chad to warp to any ally if his HP ever drops below 50%. It's sorta like the opposite of Wings of Mercy, which allows you to warp to any ally once their HP falls below 50%. Definitely good for squishier units, and certainly a solid skill when in a pinch. And lastly, for his C slot, Chad comes with Speed Smoke 3. As a dagger unit, we love smoke skills. Speed Smoke is a very reliable debuff that inflicts -7 speed to the foe and any other enemies within 2 tiles of that foe. It's a great skill to have when on a budget and can still be very useful even in some of the more challenging difficulty modes. Alright, so that completes his base kit. Much like last time, I've got 3 builds for you all today, and for the first one, we're gonna start things off with our budget build. Let's get into it. Okay, for our budget build, we're gonna stick with a formula that's already been tried and true. Veteran players should be very familiar with close counter advantage builds, but regardless of how new you are to the game, know that this build is very cheap and very effective. So for our weapon, we've got 2 options. The most budget-friendly option is Chad's native Rogue Dagger Plus. Thanks to its self-buffing capabilities, it can still find some use in helping boost Chad's defenses just before the enemy phase. However, the preferred weapon, which I will admit is not very budget-friendly, is the Broadleaf Fan Plus. The Broadleaf Fan is a very potent dagger that grants Chad an in-combat boost to his attack equal to the total combined debuffs on the enemy. For that reason, it's important that between Chad and his allies, we are always debuffing the enemy whenever possible to really make the most out of this weapon's effect. For his assist skill, I actually chose to go with Reciprocal Aid. I didn't mention this before, but I run an almost identical build on my Matthew, and I found that Reciprocal Aid helps him fall into vantage range should he ever have to swap HP with an injured ally. It's rather niche, but then again, so are most of my builds. For Chad's special, we're gonna tack on Glimmer. I say this in a lot of my videos, but I'm a huge fan of lower cooldown specials, especially on units that don't have high base attack. They're quicker to activate, making them a much more reliable source for some solid damage output. Alright, now on to the meat of the build. For his A slot, we've got Close Counter. Close Counter is an excellent skill which allows any ranged unit to counterattack in any close ranged enemy engagements. Unfortunately, Close Counter is somewhat of a rare skill and to this day is only available on 3 units, 2 of which are seasonally locked. But for any new players out there, you get a free Takumi from having completed the tutorial maps. So assuming you still have that Takumi sitting in your barracks, I would highly encourage you to consider who you fodder his skills off to. And that's ultimately why I consider this a free-to-play friendly skill. Moving forward, in Chad's B slot, we've got Vantage. Vantage is another huge part of this build, which, during the enemy phase, allows Chad to attack before the enemy's first hit. His HP does have to fall below 75%, but it can become very lethal once you consider how many debuffs we're stacking on the enemy. Speaking of debuffs, for his C slot, we're gonna throw in a good old reliable smoke skill. As a reminder, Chad does come with Speed Smoke in his base kit, which actually synergizes with this build quite nicely. With it, it'll help ensure that he outspeeds any enemies on the enemy phase, further allowing him to double them. However, my choice of smoke skill is going to be an attack smoke, and the reason for that is that so far, we don't have any buffs to Chad's defense. Falling into Vantage range can be pretty easy, but we want to minimize the risk of Chad being one-hit KO'd, so this will help put him in a better position defensively for the enemy phase. And lastly, for his Sacred Seal, I decided to go with Brazen Attack Defense. I mentioned this during my Echidna video, but I do love Brazen skills, as they synergize very well with skills like Vantage and Desperation, all of which tend to have very similar HP thresholds. Because of this, Chad will get a pretty meaty buff to those respective stats once he falls below 80%. Inversely, if you find that Chad is having a hard time doubling his enemies, I would probably swap it in for Brazen Attack Speed or Brazen Speed and Defense, whatever best suits the needs of your team. Alrighty, so that was it for our budget build. Again, remember that this build is heavily reliant on enemy debuffs, so make sure you're pairing Chad up with some allies that got Panic, Ploy, or even Chills built into their kits. Alright, so for build number 2, we're gonna switch gears and focus on the player phase, aiming to capitalize on Chad's high base speed. With a boon and weapon refine in speed, we're gonna start things off with the Lethal Carrot Plus. The Lethal Carrot is a fun weapon that guarantees an increase of plus 10 damage when Chad's special activates. Much like with the Broadleaf fan, it also debuffs the enemy's defense and resistance by 5. For his assist skill, we've got Reposition. As always, Reposition allows us the flexibility of slingshotting our allies across the map, making for some interesting hit-and-run strategies, as well as allowing us to get Chad closer to the action. For his special, we're gonna implement Moonbow. Moonbow is a great skill for units with lower base attack as it scales its damage boost off the enemy's defense and resistance. It's important to note that Moonbow also has a cooldown cost of 2, making it very easy to activate, and with the A skill that we're about to talk about, you'll find Chad activating Moonbow very frequently. So for his A skill, we're gonna opt for a more premium option, Flashing Blade 4. Flashing Blade 4 is a great skill that will increase the special charges Chad gets per attack so long as his speed is higher than the enemy's during combat. For that reason, it's imperative that we bolster his speed up as much as possible. It's also worth noting that Flashing Blade 4, as opposed to Flashing Blade 3, also gives him an added boost of plus 5 damage to every attack. A nice little boost that Chad will definitely appreciate. For his B slot, we're gonna go with Desperation. Much like with Vantage, Desperation also has an HP threshold of 75% or below, but it's the player phase variant, as it allows Chad to attack and then counter-attack before his foe's first attack. It changes the attack priority, and assuming that Chad is able to outspeed the enemy, which he should considering this build, he'll be able to get his 2 attacks in before the enemy can even touch him. Another fun option that really capitalizes on the speed we're building for him. Now for his C slot, Chad's got some flexibility, and this slot can remain open to best suit the needs of your team. But for the sake of this build, I'm gonna plug in Joint Hone Speed in an effort to ensure that Flashing Blade 4 is always activated. So long as Chad is next to an ally at the start of a turn, both him and that ally will receive a visible buff of +5 speed. A budget alternative would be a speed wave skill, which many of us should have access to via the Rolf that we received from last month's Halloween Tempest Trials. And lastly, for a Sacred Seal, I'm utilizing another Brazen skill. Like I said, they synergize really well with Desperation because of their similar HP requirements. However, unlike our last set, we're definitely going to want to implement Brazen attack speed to further ensure that he's outspeeding his enemies. Alright, and on to our last build, which is perhaps the most unique of the three that I've prepared for us today. This build has a definitive emphasis on tearing down dragons, as it was largely inspired by the weapon we've got today, the appropriately named Dragon Slasher Plus. This is a brand new dagger that was just made available on this exact same banner via Lorem. Of course, its effects aren't entirely new, as it shares the same attributes as the Cloud Mayugi, which was seasonally locked. This particular weapon has a type advantage over dragon foes and also disables any skills that change attack priority. This applies to both the enemy and the user, meaning we can't run Vantage or Desperation with this weapon. Because this build is designed to counter dragons and mages alike, a boon and refine in resistance is optimal. Now for his special, we're gonna choose Ruptured Sky. I whipped up a similar dragon slaying build in my first video for Ross, and my absolute favorite part of the build was utilizing Ruptured Sky. With only a cooldown count of 2, this special activates very easily and does increased damage on dragon type foes. For his A slot, we've got 2 solid options for Chad, the first of which is Swift Sparrow 3. I love Swift Sparrow, and I think that with Chad's stats, he'll definitely welcome the increase to his attack. With an added value of +7 speed though, Chad is definitely going to be doubling his enemies. My alternative for this build, however, is Mirror Impact. Our build is largely focused on resistance, and because his resistance isn't very good to begin with, Mirror Impact is an incredibly solid choice that will increase his attack by 6 and his resistance by 10. Speed becomes even less of an issue when you consider the fact that Mirror Impact also prevents the foe from performing a follow-up attack. It's definitely a premium skill, I'll tell you that. For his B slot, we're gonna go with Mystic Boost. Many dragons are able to counterattack regardless of distance, and when they do so, their breath attacks will target either your defense or resistance, whichever is lower. What's fantastic about Mystic Boost is it ensures that dragon attacks only target Chad's resistance, which is exactly what we're trying to build up. It also offers some slight HP recovery at the start of every turn, which is a nice bonus. For his C slot, I chose Attack and Resistance Oath 3. Similar to Bond skills, Oath skills are dependent on the user being adjacent to allies in order for their buffs to work. A boost to his attack and resistance will further prepare him against any dragons, regardless of which phase we're on. And lastly, for his Sacred Seal, we've got Distant Defense 3, which increases his defense and resistance by 6 points when facing off against other ranged units. Albeit obvious by now, this will further bolster his defenses against counter-attacking dragons, as well as any mages he may run across. Alrighty, and that is it for build number 3. It's really niche, but I think that's what I love most about it. Chad's base resistance isn't that great, but with all of these skills combined, he should have little issue taking care of mages. Plus, dragon foes can be so annoying to deal with in just about every game mode, so I think it's kind of hilarious that we have all these skills and weapons that are so perfectly attuned to countering them. Kinda sucks for people who love using dragon units, but it's awesome for the rest of us. Anyway, here are Chad's stats when merged up. As you can see, his speed can come up pretty high. Without even a boon in speed, 42 is very solid, and he won't even need much to be able to successfully double most enemies. With a weapon equipped, his attack will likely come up to around 46, which isn't bad either. It's not breaking 50, of course, but with all the brazens and smoke skills we've tossed around today, he's sure to do numbers. Alright, and that's our video, guys. I hope you all enjoyed. It might be worth mentioning that some of the builds that I crafted for Tethys might also be viable on Chad, so if anybody's looking for some additional inspiration, feel free to check out that Tethys video I made a few weeks ago. You can definitely find more builds there. As always, here's a mobile wallpaper I made for Chad using some of the assets I pulled from his video's thumbnail. You can find a link to it along with all my other wallpapers in the description below. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please let me know what you all think in the comment section below. Do you guys like Chad? Did anyone ever expect him to make it into FEH? Because I sure didn't. I wasn't expecting Altina either, and that banner is about to drop tomorrow, so clearly Intelligent Systems are trying to keep us on our toes. Hopefully I can get this edited and up before the next banner drops next week. And hopefully, more importantly, it's far-fetched. Anyway, I hope you all have a happy Turkey Day and enjoy the time off with your family and friends. Much love, take care.